Good morning, everyone, and welcome to RosieCon Book Festival. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Diane Rogers, and I'm the school librarian at Ben Davis Ninth Grade Center in Indianapolis, Indiana, and I'm the founding member of RosieCon Book Festival. I'm very pleased that the audience has decided to join us today for our festival's second to last author panel for the school year 2021-2022. And today's discussion is with Mindy Mcginnis, and we are going to be discussing the Rosewater title Heroine, written by her. RosieCon Book Festival chooses which books and authors to invite to our festival based upon the titles each year that are on the Elliott Rosewater, Indiana High School book list. All authors and illustrators for the 25 titles are invited to participate. For various reasons, usually scheduling conflicts, it isn't always possible for all invitees to attend. In case you didn't know, the Rosewater list is a recommended reading list of contemporary titles for Indiana teens. The list is renewed and refreshed every school year with new and exciting books and is sponsored by the Indiana Library Federation. Near the end of each school year, teens from across the state vote for their favorite book, and that winning title is given the Rosewater Award. Voting is online and is currently open. In fact, voting will end at the end of April here in 2022, so definitely make sure that you are voting, audience members. You can go to vote to rosiebookaward.com. That's ROSIE bookaward.com, and you can place your vote for which of the 25 titles is your favorite. You can actually vote for any of the titles that you read. Voting is really rating the book on a scale of 1 to 5, 5 being super crazy, awesome, excellent, and 1 being not sure how this book got through. So that's how you vote, is by rating the book. Voting is open through the first week of May, and that's when we announce who wins the Rosewater Award. Before I give the mic and camera over to our author and our moderator today, let me take a second to thank our sponsors of the RosieCon Book Festival. Money and support has been provided by the Lilly Endowment for the Arts, the Indianapolis Foundation Library Fund, and Wayne Township Schools, which is the school district that I work for. Without the support of these organizations, RosieCon Book Festival would not be possible, and we are in its 4th year. Finally, enough introduction. Let's begin our panel. I want to introduce you to our moderator for today. Her name is Jenny Jurgen. She is a teen librarian at Anderson Public Library in Anderson, Indiana. Welcome, Jenny. And it's great to have you with us today. Why don't you take it away?
Thank you. I'm happy to be here. I get to introduce Mindy Mcginnis, and she is an Edgar Award winning author, and she has written many titles, and it is across many genres, including the title today that we're going to be talking about, Heroine. Some of the titles that she's most well known for are The Female of the Species, which I've heard so much about and I tell many people about. Be Not Far From Me, and then she's got The Initial Insult and The Last Laugh, which is being published this year. So welcome.
Thanks so much.
Yes. So today, the title of the panel is Devastating Drug or Fantastic Female. And so I have to say, this was the first book I read of yours.
Oh, okay.
And so it was really exciting way to get introduced to your writing. And it totally changed my perspective on the drug problem we have here in the United States. Now, what was your inspiration for the book?
So first of all, I am in an airport, so you will hear all kinds of things around me, announcements and flights, and hopefully nothing too loud because that's bad in an airport. But so I got the inspiration for writing this book when I was actually doing a visit. I am from Ohio. And I was in Southern Ohio visiting a school district that had very recently had a student death. And I was getting ready to do my presentation, and I always ask the the librarian or the teachers or whoever is hosting me, is there anything going on in the district right now that I should be aware of? Because I tend to like kind of fly fast and loose, and sometimes I make jokes that maybe I should make. So it's like I'm always making sure that, nothing is like in the water at the moment that I need to be aware of. And they said, yeah, we did have a student die recently. And I was like, oh, I'm so sorry. I was a teenager in the 90s. And in the 90s, when teenagers died, they died in car accidents. And so I just made that assumption, and I was like, oh, I'm so sorry, what happened? And they said, oh, well, actually they OD'd, and it was their 4th OD that year. And it was, I believe it was November, and they had already lost 4 students. I knew that the region that I was going to is very, very heavily affected, but I didn't know it was that bad. And I was blown away, and I ended up having conversations with a lot of the staff and students. And one of the girls there, the funeral was actually that day, and one of the girls in the audience, who was a senior, wanted to talk to me. The kids that were attending the funeral had to leave early, and she said, I'd like to talk to you if you can set some time aside. I was like, yeah, of course. And so I was talking to her, and she told me that a group of the upperclassmen girls had made like kind of a pact that they were all going to buy Black dresses for prom because they knew that they were going to need good funeral clothes, that they were going to need more, that they were going to be going to more funerals, and that they were going to need a nice dress to wear to funerals, and they were going to keep it kind of low-key, little black dress for prom in order to have usable funeral clothes. And I was like, that's insane. That is a horrible thing for anyone to have to consider, but even more so when you are trying to multitask your prom dress with good funeral attire. So I drove home thinking about this and thinking, I want to write about this. But I also I need to learn a lot before I even attempt this. It takes 2 sticks to start a fire. It takes 2 ideas to create a story. These things have to strike. And sometimes I know I do a lot. Like I'll have little things that I want to write about, but I'm not quite sure what to do with it. And it'll just kind of sit in the back of my head. One of those things was that I really, really wanted to write a female athlete. You're a school librarian, you're aware it's very, very easy to find athlete books for boys. Finding athletic books for girls is a challenge. It should not be, it is. And it's something that you can have like maybe 2 or 3 go-tos that you recycle over and over and over, but those are your female athlete books, and there are 3 of them. So that is something that has always frustrated me, because I am an athlete. I was an athlete in high school. I'm an athlete now. And it really bothered me. And I always felt like this was a gap that needed to be filled. And I had brought it up to my editor before, and they were like, I mean, yes, we agree. However, like, we don't want you writing the traditional, march to the championship and, the end of the big fight at the end. And I was like, no, I get it. Like, we need something more. It can't just be, yeah, I won a trophy. And one of the easiest, quickest, most accessible ways that young people do end up hooked on Oxycontin is through injuries from sports, and athletes end up on painkillers for recovery, things like that. And so I learned this as I was reading, and those 2 sticks hit each other. And I was like, oh, female athlete and the opioid epidemic. And I pitched the idea to my editor, and they were like, yeah, we want this to happen right now. And I was like, okay, cool. So so that is kind of how that came about. It was those 2 ideas just kind of hitting together. As authors, we say we do have a lot of things that we hold on to and we just kind of put up here. And a lot of us, we call it a lint ball. There's literally just a little lint ball rolling around inside of our brain. And once it's rolled around enough, like it gains enough mass, and you're like, oh, it's a novel now. So that's always a pleasant moment.
So did you play softball?
Oh, yes. I did.
Okay.
I tell people that I don't actually have a heart. It's just a softball with tubes coming out of it. Yeah.
What position did you play?
I was a catcher and I was a first baseman.
Okay.
So I was always infield. I mean, I played every infield position. Can't pitch. I should say that. I cannot pitch, but I played every infield position over time. I was versatile, but second base was pretty common, but first base and catcher, those were my positions, which I'm tall for a catcher. But like I said, I live in a very, very rural area. So it was kind of like, if you had the skills, you ended up doing the thing.
Yes. Yeah. I thought it was unique that that Mickey was a catcher. And I liked
Mhm.
that because I don't think that's a position you normally see a character play in a book.
No, and it's critical because it's like you are in on every single play. If the ball's moving, you're in on it, and it's just it is a critical position, and the relationship between the pitcher and the catcher is actually very, very important. Pitchers can perform better or not as well depending on who their catcher is, and catchers are just like critical. And you're right, it's not like a fancy position. People don't really think about catchers that often unless you play the sport, and then you know how critical a catcher is. It's also the dirtiest job. You are down, you are dirty, you can get hurt, you can get run over, you can get knocked over. There's an umpire like leaning over you the entire time. There's a person with a bat standing over you. Like it is high octane. I loved catching. It was fantastic.
And you see that in the book in many of the games. As you read through it, you know, it's not an easy
No, it's not. It's a
position.
hard job. It's a hard job. I had stretch marks on my thighs when I was like 17 from catching because my muscles would get bigger and recede in the off season actually. So I had stretch marks at like 16, 17 years old from catching.
So I think that played well into their friendship between Mickey and Carolina. Did I say that right?
Carolina, yeah.
Okay. So how did you come up with Carolina's character?
So Carolina was someone that I wanted to not have an all-white cast, for one thing. That was important to me. But also I grew up in, and the book is set in, all of my books are set in very, very rural areas in Ohio. And the truth is that we don't have a lot of diversity. However, I did grow up with a single Puerto Rican in my class, and I've been to Puerto Rico a couple of times, and people don't ever think about Puerto Rico. Like it's just like not a location that people forget it exists. And they actually have culturally, it's kind of virulently anti-drug. And so I was like, oh, like this would be a really interesting thing to play with. It's like, for one thing, I know a little bit about Puerto Rico, but also I had multiple Zooms like this with a book club in Puerto Rico, and the kids, they were just so enthusiastic, and they were so I just multiple times I've Skyped with this book club in Puerto Rico, and I was like, I think that they would really like that if I used Puerto Rico. And I like I said, I grew up with someone from Puerto Rico, and so I was like, I think like this is something that I want to do and am like comfortable doing. So I did that, and I was very conscious of, because Carolina isn't always speaking English and her family isn't always speaking English, but they don't necessarily speak Spanish. They speak a very specific, so I had a Puerto Rican sensitivity reader to go through and first of all, check my culture, make sure I was doing things right. But also there were certain things where it's like, if you translate something, I'm not sure what our levels of appropriate are here online, so I won't say it. But there are certain things that's like, I would say something and I would just, for the purposes of the draft, just translate it into Spanish. And my and it would be an insult. And my my sensitivity reader was like, wow, like I understand, like in English that would be that, but if you really wanted to insult someone in Puerto Rico, you would say this. And this is what it means. And I was like, oh, cool, right? So I put it in the book. And then when I was Skyping with that book club in Puerto Rico, they were like, oh my gosh, you said this. And they were just like, when they told me, they were like, when we read that, we were like, oh. And I was like, it felt so good. I think it's so important to, because it's like for them, they were like, oh, like that's my phrase, like that's what we say to each other. And it's like it's an affectionate put down, but it's definitely put down.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah. And so it was something that like it meant so much to them. And I was so happy to be able to connect with them in that way.
Well, and to capture that authentically.
Yeah,
I think is great. Okay, so I think we got to talk about Mickey. So you said you were a catcher and you played softball, but you also had this inspiration from, current times. You start out the book. I mean, you immediately grab your audience because, you come upon the scene and there's people dead.
Yeah.
Walking out of the house. That is very powerful.
Yeah.
And I couldn't put the book down.
Thank you.
So I think that was a great start, but it was also, very powerful. And how am I gonna come to hear about this character when she just walked out of a house with her friend's dead?
Yeah.
And yes, so and then we go back, before the wreck, right before the wreck. So you never say in the book whether she was responsible or somebody else was responsible for the car accident.
I think the car accident was very much just a distracted driving situation. It was, bad weather. There was another driver. So the car accident for me was never like really a critical question. But of course, like my character does have that in her head because there is a snowball of events that literally changes her life. And Carolina, who was driving the car, her life as well. So my main character, Mickey, you're right. So I do start the book with her. The very first line is, "When I wake up, all my friends are dead." And she has this group of friends that she does shoot heroin with. And when she wakes up, 3 of them have OD'd. And they are in fact dead. And she's like, oh, what do I do? Right? She's a teenager. She is getting ready to play in a championship game. And she's like, well, I leave. That's what I do, and she gets in her car and she drives away. And you're right. Like, this is your introduction to this character, and your immediate reaction to her is like, oh, okay, all right, don't like you, right? Like, you make irresponsible choices. And like, that was very much on purpose, so that you see this person in the depths of despair. This is their deep dark. This is the most horrible thing that can happen. And then you go back like a year and you see her fully functioning, not using drugs, not doing anything like that, having never considered herself to be a person that would, with hanging out with her friend, going to pick up a pizza and just driving in the car and just talking about life and boys and whatever. And they're in a car accident. And her friend, the pitcher, has a broken arm. And she's the catcher, and she is thrown from the car, and she has a shattered hip. And that is very, very bad when you're a catcher. And so she only has so much time in order to physically recover to be ready to play, number one, in her senior year season, but then to help this team, which is a very, very good team, make it to state. And one of the things that's interesting for me about her motivation is that, and this is very true, addict logic is usually difficult for them to punch. They don't see the holes in their own logic. So for Mickey, who is going through a very painful physical recovery, she is given OxyContin to help herself get through. And she's like, I'm going to take this so that I can get through my recovery, so that I can be healthy, so that I can help the team, so that Carolina can pitch well, and all of these scouts from colleges can see her and she can get a free ride to college. I'm doing this for my friends. I'm doing this because I'm a good teammate. I'm doing this, right? And she can use that. She can use that logic straight up until she's shooting up in her arm and, actually using heroin because her OxyContin prescription runs out and she is still in pain and she cannot perform. And she finds out that when she does heroin, she actually performs better physically in a couple days after the fact. And she's like, oh, this is actually great. And this is actually a good thing because I can continue to help my team even more, and just keeps lying to herself about the reasons, the actual reasons why she's doing it, or even if she's an addict at all. And, it does hit a point where she hits a point deep in the book where she's like, yeah, I think I'm just going to do this because I want to tonight. And that's like a dark, dark moment for her. I think in some ways even worse than waking up that day when she finds her friends, because it's like, oh, she really has to face that. I actually like this, and that's why I'm doing it. I'm doing it for me. So yeah, it's I think one of the most critical things about the book is that, and I've had so many people contact me. I talked with addicts. I talked with recovered, but also practicing addicts. And I've talked with counselors, doctors, psychologists, therapists, all arenas. I researched very deeply in order to write this book. And so many people, the best emails that I get are from addicts that say, thank you for representing me without judgment, and for showing that, you know, this really, I mean, it's how many people have eaten an entire bag of Doritos? How many people have eaten an entire row of Oreos on your own? It's the same behavior. It's just more destructive. And we need to be able to understand that these people, we all act on these urges. Like we all have trouble controlling, you know, how many of you just impulsively buy books? Like you walk into a bookstore, ooh, and you just like, you can't help it. And you just buy all the books. And it's just like, we all have impulsive behaviors and we all do have addictive tendencies. How many of you didn't get your coffee this morning and now you have a headache, right? Like you're going through withdrawal. You have a physical addiction. And so I'm addicted to sugar. If I don't have sugar, my body actually like reacts after 3 days. I went through a cleanse and I couldn't believe how physically addicted to sugar I was. I actually had like fuzzy, like gray head. Basically, I couldn't function fully without sugar because my brain's addicted to it. It's all the same stuff. It's just that we have this huge stigma, of course, for drugs. And some of the behaviors and some of the things that I learned about like addicts and their more hurtful behaviors, when you actually understand what heroin or any dopamine inducing drug does to the brain, it makes sense. And you will have nothing but empathy for these people. I've had, like I said, many people that are addicts reach out to me and say thank you. But like even almost more importantly, I've had multiple students email me and be like, you know, I'm able to still love my mom because I read this book and I understand how she feels. And it's not that she doesn't love me or she doesn't want to interact with me. She's just has a massive problem. And, or, you know, I understand some people in my family now, or I can view them differently, or I don't hate them as much. At least I can try to understand what they're going through. And that is, I mean, that's the best compliment I could ever receive to impact other people's personal relationships and just to help people understand, like I said, we all have something we're addicted to. And, you know, when you recognize patterns of addiction, it's actually like super scary. I was like, oh man, I'm actually addicted to like 4 or 5 things. It's just that they're all socially acceptable. So like weightlifting and working, I am a workaholic. Sugar, coffee, like I have actual addictions. They're just socially acceptable addictions.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think that socially acceptable is the key there. But yes, it gave me a completely different perspective on how it just happens. And it can happen without you realizing it too.
Yes.
So I think it's one of those, for me, you know, like reading The Hate U Give, you know, understanding that, you know, people need to read this to understand and empathize better.
Yes.
So I do know that you did have a challenge, or the book has been challenged.
Yes, it has. Yes, it has.
And that was pretty recently. I think it was December. Do you want to share about that?
Yeah, totally. So heroin has been challenged, and I was very surprised of all of my books.
I know.
If you've read any of my books, you would be like, really? That one? Okay. But I had the thought, I was like, oh man, if this one got challenged, I was like, oh, wait till you read it. You're going to love me. But yeah, so heroin was challenged. And to be honest, because I was reached out to from the school district that it was challenged. It did not end up getting banned. It was challenged, and a school reporter reached out, and a student reporter reached out, and she was like, "Do you have anything to say?" And I'm like, "Yeah, sure do." But also, I was like, I want to know specifically what the challenges are. Like, I don't want to know, yes, this book was challenged. I want the specific statements. It was parents. I want the specific statements from the parents, what their problem was. And if you can get me those, then I will respond to that. Like, I don't want to respond to it's challenged in general. I don't want to respond to censorship is bad. Duh, right? So I was like, I want to know specifically why my book was banned or was challenged. And so I did receive the comments. And as a former librarian myself, it was really clear. This was a question I always asked whenever a book that I was a librarian over was challenged. My very first question was, have you read the book? And usually the answer was no. And it was pretty clear that the majority of the comments were from people that had not read the book. They had read passages. Some of the challenges in specific were this book. I'm not quoting directly, so apologies, but it said that, that it glamorizes drugs and that it makes it seem as if drugs will fix all of your problems if you're a teenager. The very first line of the book is, "When I wake up, all my friends are dead." I don't think that feels like it solves anyone's problems. My main character literally shits herself in public. That's not glamorous. So I think they probably read a couple of scenes where Mickey is doing drugs and it feels good. And that's something else that I talk about that does tend to upset people. People don't do drugs because they're like, hey, you know what? I think that I want to ruin my life. I would love to lose everything. That would be super cool. That's not why people do drugs. People do drugs because they feel good. People do drugs because it helps you in the moment. It makes you forget pain and suffering and damage and trauma. And then it becomes your trauma, right? It just becomes a new trauma and it creates more and it hurts you and it hurts everyone around you deeply and horribly. But in the moment, it's hard to believe that it's a bad thing because it feels so amazing. And that's part of what this book is about. And so I write very honestly, and there is a trigger warning in this book. This is my only book that has trigger warnings. It has a trigger warning specifically because my biggest fear was that someone who was recovered would read this book and be like, oh man, yeah, I remember that feeling. It was amazing and I want it back, right? Like that was my biggest fear. And so I have a trigger warning at the beginning that says that this has realistic portrayal of drug use. That means that people are doing drugs and enjoying themselves. This isn't a after school special where someone does drugs and then they immediately like have a seizure and fall out a window. Like it is not like immediate cause and effect. By the end of the book, yeah, she wakes up and all of her friends are dead. Before that, she has some fun. And so I write honestly about drugs and drug use, and that was a problem. I can't understand that. My position on censorship, especially from a parent's point of view, if a parent says this book is inappropriate for my child, they're right. They know their child. If they say my child is not ready to read this book, yes, okay, like you are the parent of your child. They are a minor. You get to make that decision for them. When you say this book is not appropriate for any child, now I have a problem because you don't get to make that decision. So that's where I stand on censorship. I would never tell a parent that they're wrong if they don't want their child to read my books. That's fine. I am not the parent of that child. It's not my decision. But you can't dictate what other people can and cannot read. There was one challenge that actually made sense to me. And I was very, very careful when I was writing this book to make sure that this was not a how-to, that this was not walking you through how to get drugs, how to use drugs, how to shoot up. That's super important to me. I'm not writing a brochure. Right. So I was very, very careful to make sure that the information that I had in there was not actually useful. Right. So if Stephen King once wrote I can't remember what book it was, but he has someone hot wiring a car. And he was like, he was like, I have to make this right. I'm going to find out how to hotwire a car. And then he did. And then he was like, oh, I'm telling people how to hotwire a car. Right. And so he changed like one wire so that the way he wrote it wouldn't actually work. I did something similar. So the drug culture, the references, some of the appropriation is stretched from mid-90s all the way up to current. So a lot of the even phrases are different. But one of the things in particular, at one point, my character, they have OxyContin, and they haven't moved on to actually using heroin yet. They have OxyContin. And one of the more experienced drug users says, hey, if you take this and you crush it up, it gets rid of the time release coating on the outside, and you can put it in your gums or you can snort it, and you don't have to wait for it to get into your bloodstream. And and the comment did not specifically reference that scene, but they were like, it shows kids how to use drugs. I understand why you would be like, whoa, this is horrific. Why would someone write this? That process would have worked in the year 2000. It would not work now, because Purdue Pharma immediately, once they found out that people were grinding up OxyContin and snorting it, they immediately changed the chemical components so that the time release was not just a coating, it was actually like throughout the entire pill. You cannot grind up OxyContin unless you have you can't just hit it with a book or something. Like you have to have real tools, or my understanding is that it wouldn't even work now. It just kind of becomes mush and you're not able to snort it or anything like that. So I actually did understand that reaction where people were like, oh, wow, like Mindy Mcginnis just wrote how you grind up OxyContin and snort it. That's great. Thanks, lady. And it's like, I completely understand that reaction. Why don't you ask first, ask me, contact me, my contact information is out there, and say, hey, this isn't appropriate. And I would say, yeah, no, totally. Like if you read this, you would probably think, wow, okay, she's a horrible human being. Give me a little bit of credit. I'm not teaching teenagers how to use drugs, right? So no, none of the things that actually happen in the book, if you put them into practice in real life, would they work? I very specifically made sure to change things so that they wouldn't. So there was an element of the challenge that I did understand. It was like, if you just read this, and you would probably be like, oh, that is horrible. Yes. And I responded to that in kind. It's like, I was very conscious to be sure to not be writing a guide on how to get high with your friends.
Definitely understand that. I also noticed while reading the book, as Mickey progresses in her addiction, that, she has to resort to stealing money. Yeah. Her friendship with Carolina suffers. She starts doing more questionable things. Her relationship with her mother it is not good. And I liked that you included it. It was very realistic.
Yeah.
Because you see all of the side effects.
Oh, yeah.
And the inclusion of her stepmom being a recovering addict. What made you decide to do that?
I think she needed to have someone alongside her, someone that she previously had not liked or really wanted to be around much. She needed to have a model of, you can do this and you can get through this. And because everyone around her was pretty squeaky clean, right? She needed to have a model that says, hey, I've been there and I've done this, and you know me, and I'm an example of a person that has been where you are, and I came out the other side and I am okay now. And so I think that was important, but also it was important for Mickey to see that she's not horrible, she's not dirty, she's not trash. She doesn't need to be thrown out now that she's had this problem. Her stepmother is married and in a loving relationship and has a baby. And, she never had any problems that she had with her stepmother were all related to stepmother things. Like, she never thought, oh, she's a horrible human being. Like, I've never seen her kick a cat or, back into a car in the parking lot and drive away, right? Like, she's a good person. And so it was important for Mickey to be able to be recover internally about thoughts and feelings about herself, to see someone that has also been an addict and is just a regular human being. She's not incarcerated. She's not out on the streets. She's not, selling her body for money. Like, she is a married woman with a kid. And she's like, yeah, dude, I've shot heroin, for a lot, and I'm okay. Right. So it was important to show, number one, that you can come out of it. You can come out the other side and you can be healthy and functioning. You just have to be super vigilant for the rest of your life to not activate those needs again. So yeah, that was really, and it also just humanizes the stepmother to an extraordinary extent. I can tell you, as someone that toured right before pandemic, I toured for this book. And I was actually at a librarian conference. It was a national librarian conference. And I had people coming through my line to have me sign their book. And I had a librarian, and everybody was wonderful. Everyone knows someone. Everyone, people would say, I really appreciate this. And then some people would just be like, wow, my son, or well, my sister-in-law, and usually would not be able to speak after that, right? And I would just be like, I understand. And I had a woman come through, and she was a librarian, and she was what you think of when you think of librarians. It's what she looked like, it's how she behaved. And she said, thank you for this. And I was like, yes, of course. And she said, I'm an addict. Like, I'm a functioning addict. I shoot up every day. And I was like, yeah, I understand, and it's like, no one would have ever guessed that there's this, librarian that's like, yeah, she's a functioning addict. And when people think about heroin in particular, any needle in an intravenous drug, they think about people passed out the subway and like all these different things. And it's like, no, it could be your coworker, it could be your mom. Like you don't know. You can be a functioning addict and still have a job and dress yourself and eat dinner and take care of your family. Like eventually it'll catch up to you and you will have major issues. But yeah, people don't understand the war against drugs that we've been fighting on so many ridiculous fronts since the 80s has really imprinted on people's minds that if you use drugs, if you're a drug user, then you're probably in a parking lot somewhere begging for money, and that's not the case. So I think it's a part of showing Mickey is showing that slide and how easy it is. And then part of using the stepmom is to show, number one, that you can recover, but number two, that it really can't be anyone.
Well, and I thought with Edith being the initial supplier, that also showed that it could be anyone.
Yeah.
Because I just would never have pictured an older lady.
Yeah, an older white lady. And the truth is that, so that is very much pulled from late 90s Oxycontin culture. If you read the book Dreamland, it is part of what Michael Quinones talks about in Dreamland, which is a wonderful book. It's all about like the beginnings of the opioid crisis and how much of it is centered in the Rust Belt, like where I live. And he talks about how in the late 90s when Oxycontin first came out, first of all, and I won't get into all of it, but the way it was very dishonestly marketed as non-addictive, but also senior citizens, if they had Medicaid, Medicare, they were able to have their prescriptions filled for free. This is a population that has a high pain, living with daily pain in their lives. They were able to get this supposedly non-addictive substance. It was also incredibly expensive. So Oxycontin is typically about $1 a milligram. So you can have an 80 milligram pill, one pill, and this is worth $80. And so you have senior citizens filling these big bottles that are worth thousands of dollars in some cases, and to them it's free for them, right? And maybe they need to pay the boy to mow the lawn, or they need to pay the electric bill, or so it's just like, it was really interesting to me that like initially, because I've had a lot of people say I didn't believe that Edith would be a drug dealer, and I was like, that was actually kind of how it started. And so I loved being able to use that element of really like white suburban drug dealer that is, is literally your grandma next door that has access. So again, like I said, I did take different routes with the way that I presented things in the book. So that is kind of something that has been pinpointed as a kind of a groundswell, especially in along the Rust Belt, as far as the beginnings of the opioid epidemic. And it wouldn't necessarily come into play in 2022, right? Mm-hmm. But like I said, I kind of smeared time so that some of the drug references and the abilities to get drugs would be a little bit different than they are now. And so the idea of senior citizens being the root of the problem is no longer true. And it is no longer as easy to get Oxycontin as it was. Like in the 90s, they were throwing it off of rooftops. Like it was crazy. I had my wisdom teeth out and they gave me, I was 16. Mm-hmm. And I had a bottle like this, like it was stupid, with a refill.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, they don't do that as much anymore.
No. There's actually been, I've been reading recently, there's actually been a pushback that it's too hard to get, and people that are in genuine, real, horrible pain are having a hard time getting access to Oxycontin.
So, can I ask you what you have in the works?
Oh, yes, of course.
Okay.
So I actually have a book coming out next week, and I'm in an airport because I'm getting ready to start a tour. And it is The Last Laugh, which is the sequel to The Initial Insult, which came out last year. It is a murder mystery revenge plot that is based on Edgar Allan Poe short stories. So The Initial Insult is out now, and it deals with a backdrop that is drawn from The Cask of Amontillado, The Black Cat, and Mask of the Red Death. So I actually wrote this book in 2018, and then Tiger King came out, and then we had a pandemic. And so in the book, there is like a murder mystery, there's an old murder mystery, and then there's a revenge plot with a girl like breaking a frenemy up in the basement of a huge party that's going on. And then at the same time, a stomach flu breaks out that just like rips through the population, and like everybody is sick, and there ends up being like people aren't allowed to leave their homes. And at the same time, there's what when I was growing up was called a white trash zoo. And it's just an irresponsible exotic animal owner, and the panther gets out. And so the panther shows up at this kegger where there's a murder going down in the basement, and a stomach flu is breaking out. And so I wrote this book in 2018, and my editor was like, I do not know how we're ever going to pitch this book. So then 2019 happened, and I'm like, it's the Tiger King, Miss Edgar Allan Poe with COVID if it was the stomach flu. And my editor is like, oh my God. He's like, yeah, it is.
It's amazing. I'm not going to lie. I loved that book.
Oh, thank you so much. It's bizarre. Like I
It
know
is.
It's bizarre.
It ends on a cliffhanger.
Yes, it does.
And I was, as soon as I finished it, I was like, oh, what did you do to us?
I've never done that before. So I earned it. I earned one. It's like my 12th book. So finally I did a cliffhanger. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
So The Last Laugh comes out March 15th, and you will get all your answers. You will find out the answer to the murder mystery and all kinds of things too.
And it's very satisfying. I will say that.
Oh, you read? Okay, good. You got an advanced copy.
Yes, I got an advanced copy, and it was a ride. It was a wild ride. It was amazing.
Thank you.
So
I'm really proud of that one. I have to say, I actually have a friend at the gym where I work out that I gave him an advanced copy, and he kind of gives me an update every other day. And yesterday he walked up to me, we were getting ready to deadlift, and he's like, so I got to the part with the maggots, and I was like, yeah.
Yes. So I gave it to, I've talked about it to many friends, and recommended it highly.
Well, thank you for that.
Yes. And I am The Female of the Species. I think everybody should read.
Thank you.
And Be Not Far.
I'm getting ready for that one to get banned. I mean, knock on whatever, but yeah, of all my books, I don't know.
Yes. So you're on, getting ready to go on tour for The Last Laugh. Are you writing another?
I just turned in my book for 2023.
Okay.
I'm really, really excited about that one. So it is a murder mystery, and it is set in a small town in Ohio. And it is about a girl who's real like type A, super cool. She wants to be a journalist when she grows up. She's part of a family that is like kind of known. Her dad's a lawyer, like we always do the right thing type of family. And she finds out that because her school counselor is an alcoholic, she doesn't have enough credits to graduate, and she needs a history credit. And she's like, excuse me, no. And she's very, very angry because she's going to Harvard, right? First she has to graduate high school. And because her school counselor screwed her, she's like, oh my gosh. So she actually has a podcast that she runs about her small town, just like covering things that are going on. And the administration is like, hey, why don't you make this historical and we'll call it a credit? And she's like, okay, cool. But underneath this good girl, there's this little vein of like anger, and everyone knew that the school counselor was an alcoholic, and no one did anything because no one ever says anything because everyone is too nice, right? And she's like, I got screwed because everybody's too nice. So I'll do local history, and boy, I'm hitting back. Right. And so she starts to cover some things from the past about the small town, which of course everyone still lives there and all the descendants are still there, that are a little bit tricky for people. And then at the same time, there is another girl who also needs a history credit, who's real rough, and she's going to be the first person to graduate from her family. And the two end up paired together working on this project. So you have the unlikely duo. There is a streak of about a week in the 90s when a series of horrible events happened in their small town. It's called the long stretch of bad days. So a tornado hit the town and utterly destroyed it. Their only murder that ever happened that was unsolved happened. And a flash flood filled the dog pound and drowned all of the dogs in the pound. And they start investigating the long stretch of bad days for their podcast, and they find out that there is someone disappeared, the floods and from the tornadoes, and it's a teenage girl that just disappeared, and no one ever talks about it, and everyone pretends like they never knew her and she was never there. And they're like, hey, this isn't right. And so that then escalates into all sorts of horrible things are happening. Bigfoot is in it. Like, I mean, it's just, there's a Bigfoot shout out. And it's really fun. It is complicated. In many ways, it is actually based on my hometown. My hometown was destroyed by a tornado in the 80s. We've never had a murder. I feel like I have to say that. Like, if I don't say that, I'm going to get in a lot of trouble. We've never had a murder, but we did actually have the town nearby actually did have a flash flood that very sadly drowned the dogs that were in the pound. And so there ends up being kind of like a theme that runs through all of these tragic events, and the girls end up really kind of getting neck deep in a lot of old stuff and like stirring up some things and getting in some trouble with people in the present that are trying to keep things quiet. So it's called The Long Stretch of Bad Days, and that will be out in 2023. I'm assuming February, March time period. I'm so excited about that book. I just finished it up, finished up all the edits and everything, and it just went out and it's in the bag. And yeah, it was so much fun to write. And so many people from my hometown are going to read it and recognize things from home. And yeah, it was really cool.
Okay, so one last question right now. What are the lint balls you have floating around that don't have, that other thing?
So I have a horror novel I would love to write. Yeah, I've got a horror floating around in there. I'm going to say one thing, and everybody can go Google it. So I garden quite a bit, and I discovered something in my garden one day that I had never seen before, and I didn't know what it was. And I thought it was bizarre. And I won't go into any detail because we're live, but if you Google the devil's dipstick, you will see what I'm talking about.
Okay.
So that was growing in my garden, and it bears a striking resemblance to a piece of human anatomy. And
I can imagine.
Yeah. And I was just like, what is that? And, and that was years ago, but then it's kind of started something spinning in it. So I do actually have a horror novel that I would love to write. No plans as of right now about that actually happening. But I would love to. I mentioned on my Facebook page not that long ago, I would love to write a sequel to A Madness So Discreet, which many, many people have been pushing for. I would love to make that happen. Unfortunately, in publishing, typically you can see about a 30% drop off from one book to the next. So a sequel will get like only 70 or 60% of the readership will come through. And even though the Amanda So Discreet won the Edgar, or no, I'm sorry. Yes, it did. It won the Edgar Allan Poe Award. Even though it won that in 2015, it hasn't like sold enough for my publisher to really greenlight that, but I might be considering some other options for that. So that's a lint ball that's knocking around. I got a verse novel I would love to write. I mean, there's always something. There's always something out there. Yeah. Okay.
And then I just saw in my notes, you've been working on City of the Dead with James Patterson.
City of the Dead is out now. That is a Maximum Ride novel. So I co-authored that with James Patterson, and that was super exciting. So that came out last November. So it is part of the Maximum Ride reboot, and it is all about her daughter, Hawk. And so that is actually book 2 in the reboot of the Maximum Ride series, and it is called City of the Dead.
And how was that?
It was
writing
fun.
With somebody else.
It was fun. Well, I actually, I do write under a pen name as well. And so I have co-authored books with friends. Don't get excited. It is not similar. You're not missing out on any Mindy Mcginnis gems. Like, they are very, very silly, fun, off-brand books. So I do write underneath a pen name with friends. And those I've written like gosh, I think we have like 17 or 18 books out together. So I have co-authored a lot. And so there was nothing really new under the sun there. He was lovely to work with. Everything was smooth and wonderful. It was really nice because that actually happened like right towards the beginning / middle of the pandemic. And it was really actually wonderful to have an extra project. Like I was worried about workload, and having an extra project was actually great. You know, we were all stuck at home, and work was needed. Work was good.
That's great. Now I do know you have some pets. I've seen pictures.
I have a few.
Okay, so cats and a dog.
Cats and a dog. Yeah. So I have a Dalmatian. His name is Gus. Usually he is with me at every Zoom. I actually get requests to make sure Gus shows up, but he is not here. Obviously, I'm at the airport. And so Gussie is well, I mean, I don't know. He either he is a human or I'm a dog, but either way, he's pretty sure that we're married. So yeah, he is, he's my spouse. That dog, he's a pandemic puppy. I got him in May of 19 and loves his mama and has to be with his mama all the time. So that's Gussie, and he is wonderful. I also have 3 indoor cats, Minnow, Norton, and Gilly. And they were all little bottle feds. I live on a farm, and their mother had abandoned them, and they had to be bottle fed. So they are also humans. And then just recently, it's been horrible here in Ohio. We've had horrible cold weather, just like go outside, you'll die kind of weather. And I showed up at my mom's, and there was just a kitten outside, and she was crying, and she was doing, like, if anybody knows anything about cats, she was yelling for help. And then when you tried to help her, she ran away from you. And then she rolled over and showed you her belly and then said, help me. And then when you went to her, and she ran away. And I was literally hip deep in a snowdrift. And I was like, I think this might actually be a demon trying to kill me, because she just kept luring me away from the house. And I was like, she's actually trying to kill me. That's what's going on. But then finally, like, she relented, and I picked her up, and she actually just went to the vet yesterday and got all checked out, and she is negative for feline leukemia, which is a blessing. I have actually lost a couple of kitties to that. So she's negative for feline leukemia, and she just got all of her boosters, and her name is Toomey. And so Toomey has been added to the roster because I needed another cat.
Okay, now this is going to be probably one of the hardest questions for you. Do you have a favorite book?
So my go-to would be The Stand by Stephen King. Love that book. It's amazing. There's a lot of different reasons. Some of them are just like emotional. I read that book, I think, like for the first time in maybe 6th or 7th grade. And, you know, I always wanted to be a writer. There was always something inside of me that knew that this is what I was supposed to do with my life. But everything that was available to me as a reader was very clean. It was very clean, usually pretty didactic. And the stories in my head were not that way. Like, even when I was little, like, everything in my head was pretty bad, pretty dark, pretty graphic, pretty gross. And I was like, well, I want to be a writer, but what was being modeled to me, what I think and what I want and what I think about is not stuff people write about. Like, this is bad, right? So my mother is a very open-minded person, and she allowed me to read widely and read whatever I wanted. And so I started reading Stephen King in like 6th grade. And I learned a lot. And The Stand was one that I just felt really like liberated in a lot of ways, because I started reading it and I was like, oh, you can write about this. You can write about that. You can say this word. You can do that. You can put this on the page, and people will read it and like it. And it was just like, oh, maybe I can be a writer, because everything, like I said, everything that I was being handed as a 5th, 6th grader was so clean and so, you know, antiseptic and didactic, that I was just like, oh, I can't be a writer because I'm bad, right? And I read Stephen King, and I was just like, oh no, I'm fine, I'm good.
Yes. And now, have you gotten to meet Stephen King?
No, I haven't. Actually, so when A Madness So Discreet won the Edgar, he actually had, I don't remember what it was, but something of his was actually up that year as well. So it was 2015. And so typically he would have been there, and I won and he won, and we would have actually like been in a picture together, like holding our Edgars. and he wasn't there because he had the stomach flu. And like, that's probably the biggest tragedy of my life.
Yes, understandable. I mean,
Yeah.
he is the king.
I mean, he truly is. And I mean, I obviously want to meet him, but I also am like, I would probably I'm pretty chill. And like, I've met some very famous people and just been like, hey, you know, how you doing? You're human, I'm a human. It's cool. But I think if I met Stephen King, I'd probably like lose my shit pretty fast.
Oh, well, I think one of the reasons that your books do so well here in Indiana is because we have such a similar, Ohio is so similar to Indiana.
Oh, very, yes.
And I think that is one reason that they have done so well here. And I know you've been on many of our lists, both, you know, the Rosies and Read Aloud. And so, but I've definitely enjoyed this. And again, if you haven't read Heroine, I definitely recommend it. And then, did you have input on the cover?
Yeah, so my cover designer, I'm so blessed. I have had the same cover designer for all of my books. Her name is Erin Simmons. She is amazing, and she has done all of my covers, and I love her very much. And so typically they create 4 to 5 covers for every book, and then they run it through marketing. And usually the author doesn't necessarily get to be involved. And I understand that because like we tend to be very emotional about it. Because I was a librarian for 14 years, I have reactions to it from a perspective of, is a teenager going to pick up this book? So I can look at it and not be like, hey, that's not the cover for my book. I can look at it and be like, oh no, like this is good. This is going to draw a kid, right? So I can look at it from a marketing perspective. My editor trusts me, and they usually will show me the 4 or 5 comps and ask me what I think. What I think may not always be prevailing, but they will ask me what I think. And they had shown me a few different ones, and they were still kind of playing. And then they showed me that one, and I was like, oh, winner! Like it was so good. The way you know, it says heroine with an E on the end, a female hero, and then it goes to the drug, and then it goes to hero, and then it goes to her. And it's just it's
powerful.
So smart.
Yes. Well, I think we are about at time, and Diane is back with us, but thank you so much, Mindy.
Oh, thank you.
I've enjoyed this.
Thank you for moderating. I appreciate it.
Yes.
Hey, that was an absolutely fantastic panel, both of you. Jenny, Mindy, thank you so very much for participating. Thank you for your time. And Mindy, thank you for your honesty, because I think some of those questions were really hard questions and you answered them beautifully. So thank you for that. I appreciate greatly everyone's time and attention today. Audience, thank you for watching. I hope that you've enjoyed yourself, and please do not forget to vote for the Rosewater titles. That list is online. Voting is online, and it's at rosiebookaward.com. So that's ROSIE bookaward.com. And you then click on the title of the book that you want to rate. Remember, the ratings are 1 through 5. And we're near getting to the end of the voting time here in Indiana for this school year, 2021-2022. So you will see the complete list of everything on the rosiebookaward.com website. So this is our second to last panel for this school year. Our next panel is coming up in about a month. It will be on April 7th with Sean Hutchinson, and it is about his memoir, Brave Face. So that will be another awesome panel. Sean will be joining us. I believe he's a West Coaster, so he'll be joining us for that panel from, I think it's Washington, but I'm not positive. It might be Oregon, so don't quote me on that. But educators, please don't forget that you have access to today's session as well as all previous RosieCon Book Award Festival panels on our festival website and through our YouTube channel. So you can just go there, and these panels can be used in your library or in your classroom at any time of the day. So whatever's convenient for your schedule. So please don't forget to go there, and you can do that. So everyone, audience, please be safe, stay healthy. The pandemic is waning, but it's still out there. So please stay healthy and have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye-bye.